Too passive. You really think I'm too passive? I repeated in disbelief, my voice echoing in the cramped conference room as if daring the silence to respond. The memory of that day still burns inside me, a day when my co-founder, Rick, in front of the entire team, sneered. Alex, you're just too passive to lead a startup. You always follow along and never push back. We need someone who can take charge. I sat there, stunned, my mind racing with self-doubt and indignation, wondering why someone I trusted so much could see my careful, measured nature as weakness. My name is Alex Monroe, and for years I had believed that being reflective, strategic, and, yes, even a little reserved, were the very qualities that made me a good listener and a conscientious decision-maker. But Rick's harsh words echoed in my mind, and instead of crumbling under his judgment, I decided to use them as fuel, a fire that would ultimately reshape my destiny. We started our startup, Innovitech, together about 5 years ago. I still recall those heady early days, late-night brainstorming sessions fueled by pizza, endless cups of coffee, and the thrill of trying to revolutionize the tech landscape. Rick was the extroverted visionary, bouncing ideas around like a live wire, while I was the quiet strategist, the one always reading the fine print and double-checking every detail. In our partnership, his passion and my thoughtfulness seemed to balance each other perfectly, or so I believed. But over time, as the pressures of competition and growth mounted, Rick's impatience with my cautious approach grew. You need to step up, Alex. This isn't a library, it's business, he had shouted during one of our heated meetings. I'd tried to explain that every big decision needed careful consideration, that sometimes a measured approach prevented catastrophic mistakes, but he dismissed my concerns with a wave and a wry smile. No offense, but if you keep it up this way, you'll never make it on your own, he'd said. Those words clawed at my pride, and though they stung fiercely at the time, they eventually lit a spark of determination I never expected to feel. For months, I debated silently whether to challenge his vision or to let the silence of my own actions speak for me. In the quiet moments, I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I should let him take the lead, and I'll just follow along. But every time I watched Rick commandeer meetings with flashy presentations and bold slogans, I felt an inner rumble, a conviction that true leadership isn't about loud declarations. It's built on quiet persistence, careful planning, and an unwavering commitment to one's vision. That conviction, that stubborn belief in myself, grew stronger as our startup began to attract attention. Investors were intrigued by our product's innovative features, and customers loved the precision and reliability of our services. Slowly, a shift began to occur. I started to notice that the market was responding not to Rick's bombastic style, but to the thoughtful, refined aspects of our work that I'd nurtured from the very beginning. One day, the turning point came unexpectedly. We were in the middle of a major presentation to a potential investor, a room filled with anxious faces, my palms sweaty despite the cool air conditioning, and Rick was busy showcasing our product in his flamboyant way. I, on the other hand, was quietly presenting the data, the metrics that demonstrated how our technology could truly change the industry. The numbers spoke for themselves, and as I concluded my part, the investor nodded approvingly. Later that day, after the meeting, the investor pulled me aside. Alex, what you presented was brilliant, he said sincerely. It's clear you know exactly what you're doing. I think there's huge potential here, and I'd love to see more of your vision brought to life. That moment was a quiet revelation, a validation that my approach, once dismissed as passive, was exactly what the market needed. I began to see a new path forming before me, one where I could finally take the reins of my own destiny. Instead of accepting Rick's constant criticism, I started planning. In the dead of night, I pored over financial reports, business plans, and legal documents. I started talking to advisors, reaching out to trusted mentors who had once warned me to stay in my lane. But I wasn't going to stay there anymore. I decided I was going to pave my own lane, one so successful that even Rick couldn't ignore it. I started by quietly accumulating shares in Innovitech, using a part of my savings and a line of credit I'd secured just in case. I worked meticulously in the background, networking with board members, gathering data, and building alliances within the company. Slowly, through persistence and unwavering commitment to the work I believed in, I managed to corner a significant portion of our company's equity. It was risky, and there were times I questioned if I was making a monumental mistake, but every sleepless night, every spreadsheet and financial forecast reaffirmed my resolve. Then, one crisp morning, during an emergency board meeting called by our CEO, I took a deep breath and presented a proposal that shocked everyone in the room. I outlined the data, the vision, and my plan for a future where leadership wasn't measured by who shouted the loudest, but by who could steer the company through turbulent times with wisdom and integrity. As I spoke, I noticed some skeptical faces morphing into expressions of cautious admiration. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Then, one by one, murmurs of approval rippled through the room. At that meeting, the board voted overwhelmingly in favor of a new leadership restructuring. Rick, to his utter disbelief, was removed from his executive role. I was appointed as the new CEO of Innovitech, a position I had never dared imagine in those dark days when I was told to stay in my lane. The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the company. I can still hear the hushed whispers in the corridors, the stunned silence of employees who had always seen Rick as the unstoppable force of nature, and now, here I was, the quiet strategist turned determined leader. The most ironic twist of all came a few weeks later, during a company-wide Zoom call. As I sat at the head of the virtual table, I could see Rick in the participants list, his video feed turned off, his presence reduced to a mere specter of the executive he once was. I addressed the team. I want to thank each and every one of you for believing in a vision where every idea matters, where thoroughness and thoughtful planning are celebrated. Today, we move forward as a company that values every voice, and that includes pushing boundaries, taking risks, and yes, even learning from our mistakes. The applause that followed was more than just polite. It was a resounding declaration that true leadership had found a home. In the months since that fateful meeting, Innovitech has soared. Under my leadership, we've launched new products, entered markets we had never dared dream of, and built a culture that celebrates innovation, collaboration, and integrity. I continue to hold firm to the lessons I learned, that being labeled too passive is not a mark of weakness, but an indication that you see the world with care, precision, and a deep understanding of what it takes to build something lasting. Every day, I receive messages from team members who tell me how much they appreciate the collaborative environment we've created, and even investors commend the careful yet bold decisions we've made. One afternoon, a young analyst, who had once been too timid to share his ideas, approached me and said, "Mr. Monroe, your leadership has taught me that it's okay to be thoughtful. Your calm, measured approach is exactly what we need." In that moment, I realized that every negative word I had ever heard, every sneer, every dismissive remark, had been transformed into a driving force that propelled me towards success. I also began mentoring aspiring entrepreneurs and leaders, sharing not just my strategic insights, but also the personal journey that brought me here. Don't let anyone else define what you're capable of, I'd say, especially not someone who misunderstands the value of listening, of thinking deeply, of paving your own way. My talks, delivered at local business seminars and through online webinars, resonated with audiences who were tired of the loud and brash notion of leadership that dominated the corporate world. Instead, they saw in my story the quiet power of perseverance and the unyielding belief that every detail matters. There were moments of reflection, quiet evenings when I'd sit in my office, looking out over the cityscape, and think back to the days when I was told to stay in my lane. Those days now feel like a distant memory, replaced by a reality where I not only create my own lane but also lead others on paths they never thought possible. Rick's dismissal, his assertion that I was nothing without his supposed guidance, had been the spark that ignited my transformation. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, every step of the way proving that the quiet, thoughtful approach to leadership can, in fact, move mountains. I remember a particular board meeting where I presented a new strategy for entering an untapped market. As I unveiled the detailed plan, complete with projections, timelines, and risk assessments, I noticed that some of the senior executives, those who had once sided with Rick's brash style, nodded approvingly, impressed by the thoroughness and foresight of the approach. It was in that moment that I knew I had finally come into my own. Not because I shunned the boldness of my peers, but because I had melded caution with creativity, precision with passion. Looking back on it all, I see that every moment of pain, every dismissive remark, and every label thrown at me became the very building blocks of my success. I turned what was once a perceived weakness, being too passive, into a strength that now defines my leadership style. I've learned that true power doesn't come from being loud or forceful. It comes from the quiet resolve to stand by your vision, to push through adversity, and to build a future based on integrity. So here I am, a few years later, sitting at the helm of Innovitech, surrounded by a team that trusts in the vision I've forged and the culture we nurture together. Every Zoom call, every meeting, every new project is a reminder that you can transform even the harshest criticisms into your greatest achievements. The world of business is constantly evolving, and in it, there is no single formula for success. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that leadership is not defined by a single phrase like "stay in your lane." Instead, it's about paving your own path, one meticulously planned, thoughtfully executed, and proudly owned by you. To anyone who has ever been told they're not capable of leading, who has ever been dismissed for being too passive, I say this: your strength lies in your ability to listen, to reflect, and to innovate quietly even when the world expects you to be loud. Embrace your unique approach, stand by your vision, and know that every step taken with sincerity is a victory in itself. This is my story, a journey of transformation from ridicule to triumph, from being labeled as a burden of caution to becoming the embodiment of thoughtful leadership. I turned every bit of criticism into a stepping stone, every self-doubt into a challenge conquered, and I built not just a successful company, but a legacy of integrity and authentic vision. Remember, the world isn't always ready for a quiet revolution, but that doesn't mean it isn't needed. So pave your lane, fire those doubters when you must, and let your success speak for itself. Because in the end, it's not about the loudest voice in the room, it's about the strength of your conviction, the precision of your vision, and the courage to lead with your heart as much as your mind.